In the Star Trek TNG episode, I, Borg, the Collective was so ruthless that the Collective would rip the entirety of the Alpha Quadrant apart to recover just one Borg drone. In the Voyager episode, Collective, they decided to not worry about a Borg cube that, while crippled, was still largely intact and being commanded by children. As I've stated previously, this is not a breakdown of individual episodes that involve the Borg, but an intricate breakdown on the Borg Collective and its lore. It's ironic that in the Voyager episode Collective, we learn more about the Collective in what they don't do versus what they do. In this episode, spoilers for those who haven't seen it by the by, a Borg cube runs across a pathogen that specifically destroys and kills cybernetic life forms, which is highly specific. Imagine if a species were to infect someone and then send that person to the Borg. I mean, that would be insanely effective, but nah, no one would ever think to do that. Just insane. Anyway, back to the breakdown at hand. The pathogen just devastates the Borg cube and all the Borg drones on it. Well, all except the drones that are in the maturation unit. Because, as anyone knows, babies in the womb have extra protection biologically, so it only makes sense that we have the exact same cliche wherein a maturation chamber defends the life of the baby just like a mother's womb would. Because what's the point of doing this entire thing if you can't do it like every other science fiction show? Snark aside, this does present some very specific and interesting details on how the Borg deal with children and adolescents from other cultures. The dialogue between Seven and the children seems to indicate that any individual who has not reached adulthood is put into a maturation chamber. As that drone grows, their Borg implant grows with them. This means that the cybernetic components are not added all at the same time, but are kind of grown with the person depending on that person's age. Additionally, these Borg are conditioned, the Collective bringing order to their minds throughout the years, like some form of brainwashing. It really is an interesting addition to the Borg lore. However, what is more frustrating than interesting is the way the Collective handles the derelict cube. In the episode, the Borg Collective deems that the drones are irrelevant and the Borg cube not worth salvaging. Now let's pause a minute here. The dialogue is extremely clear for those who want to argue that the cube was to be destroyed. Seven states specifically that normally when Borg are determined to be irrelevant, they deactivate. They don't destroy themselves, they don't self-destruct, they just flip a switch and go offline. In previous videos, many have argued that the Borg collect their dead to prevent the technology from getting into the wrong hands. However, this seems to be an extreme shift from what we've seen historically. As I've stated in the past, the Borg were all one unit, one organism. They no more would lose a drone than lose a finger. But now, they are willing to just toss drones aside as if they were nothing. Some have theorized that this change occurred due to Hugh, that once he was reassimilated and caused discord within the Borg cube, if not the Collective, that a policy of simply disconnecting drones was adopted. Now this is possible, sure. But you'd have to convince me that a human would be okay with chopping off an arm that may or may not have gangrene. No guarantee if it does or not, but they're just going to chop it off. I suppose we can assume that the Borg go the route of better safe than sorry. There is some logic to it, but it's somewhat of a stretch. But even with that in mind, you're telling me that the Collective are now so scared of what happened with Hugh that they would leave a Borg cube whole. We have no reason to believe that the Borg cube doesn't still have all of the major technologies that the Borg utilize. Subspace adaptation fields, Borg armor, transwarp, advanced weaponry, and information on the Collective in its entirety. The Borg Collective are so scared that they will get infected, they won't at least find a way to blow that thing to hell and back? Man, thank God for the Collective that the crew of Voyager are so stupid that Voyager doesn't find a way to steal all the technology from the cube. You know, like a transwarp drive, that thing that nearly got some of Voyager's crew killed when they were attacking a sphere, but is just here for the taking on the cube. And before anyone says it, I know that the vessel was damaged. I get that. but we have no reason to believe that the components couldn't be reused, fixed, or just weren't operational because you had only children running the ship. And don't even get me started on how the collective now decides not to bring Unity to the galaxy like they've always wanted to do, but worry about quote-unquote perfection and if something is going to hurt them becoming the ultimate species. Honestly, there isn't much more to add when it comes to the collective lore from this episode. However, since people accuse me of only pointing out errors without offering fixes, let's take a stab at it. Now, I'm going to assume that it's the Borg that has to be encountered. Additionally, we have to have kids, and it has to be a pathogen, as we know this ties into the next episode. So here's what I would have done. Instead of a Borg cube being found, I would have had Voyager trying to make its way home, as it always is, and all of a sudden they receive an emergency SOS. This SOS would have been from a ship that is currently being assimilated and is requesting help. Sensor shows that no other Borg vessels are in the area, and after some debate, it's determined that they will try to save the crew and gain any Borg tech that they can. Given the upgrades that we've discussed that have been done to the Intrepid vessel, the partially assimilated ship is no match for Voyager. Voyager disables the ship quite handily, and they beam aboard to find all of the completely assimilated adult individuals dead. There are children aboard, only half assimilated, but now knocked out. They determine that the Borg adults were killed by some form of pathogen, but for some reason, the children also have that pathogen in them, but it's not impacting them as quickly. The children are secured and put into stasis aboard Voyager, under guard of course, and while an away team is trying to get the Borg tech, the children awaken, they barely hear the Borg collective's call, and they try to resist. They overpower the guards and beam back aboard the other ship off of Voyager. And then, these children Borg send an SOS to the collective. Sensors show a Borg cube is 30 minutes away, and thanks to Tech, Voyager is able to hide and isn't identified by the collective yet. The away team is captured by the Borg children, and now we have a ticking time bomb dilemma, and the children now have captured people, so we're off to the races. In the end, the crew save the kids, destroy the ship without being able to get any of the tech, and get the hell out of Dodge before the Borg are able to identify that Voyager was ever there. And then in the end, you tie the fact that the pathogen was going so slow because it had been put in there by scientists in the next episode. And that would be my fix. Ultimately, this episode collective fundamentally changes how the Borg operate when it comes to errant drones. While this is most likely a lack of concern for the continuity issues it presents, the shift in treatment of drones can be explained by the Hugh phenomenon. Be sure to stay tuned as next week we take a look at the Borg episode from Voyager, Unimatrix Zero.